Now to the Paris Olympics and a gender row that sparked a protest on the streets of the French capital today and a furious reaction from the Italian Prime Minister. At the heart of the controversy is Algerian boxer Imane Khelif, seen here in red, whose 46-second victory on Thursday against an Italian opponent has led to widespread criticism, with claims that she should have been banned from Paris after failing a gender eligibility test at the World Championships. Despite the outcry, the International Olympic Committee has defended their decision to allow the Algerian to compete. We'll hear from them in a moment. First, though, here's Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni.
I think that athletes who have, let's say, male genetic characteristics should not be allowed to compete in women's competitions, not because we want to discriminate against anyone, but to protect the right of female athletes to be able to compete on equal terms.
The Algerian boxer was born female, was registered female, lived her life as a female, boxed as a female, has a female passport. This is not a transgender case. I know you're not saying that, but there has been some confusion that somehow it's a man fighting a woman. This is just not.
Let's pick this up with Mayan Sudai, who is a professor of law and gender studies at the University of Haifa in Israel. She's published on the topic of gender and sport. Welcome to DW, Professor. I suppose the first question that lots of people are going to ask is, how can it be that a boxer who's been disqualified by one sporting body for failing a gender test is then allowed to fight at the Olympics?
Right. So the IOC have published a statement explaining how that happened. In that statement, they explain that these two athletes, the two boxers, have been participating in the female category for years, using the eligibility test that was used for years, which is to look at their sex on the passport. So passport is the criteria that they use to determine both sex and age. Now, they were in 2023, the IBA, which is the International Boxing Association, disqualified Khelif, and the IOC declared that that decision was unestablished on scientific evidence, on sufficient scientific basis, that it was arbitrary, and that these two boxers were not given a due process. And therefore, the IOC had decided to resort to the old eligibility rules that were in place to go by passport, and how they were able to compete.
So what goes through your mind when you look at this controversy?
Well, I think that the IOC have really made a brave, supportive decision. I think that these boxers, they have, a certain, according to the publications, they have a certain sex variation, which allegedly makes them have a Y chromosome. Now, there are many women in the Olympics and different sports that have different sex variations, and they were born women, raised women, lived their whole life as women. And I think that it's really helpful to remember that women come in different sizes, shapes, colors, and sometimes even chromosomes. And so I'm really I was surprised for the good side by the IOC supported statement in athletes.
So as far as you're concerned, nothing to see here. This is a woman, and as you say, women come in lots of shapes and sizes, so she just happens to have a natural ability to punch harder.
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a real huge gap in competitivity. I mean, these are boxers that are sometimes losing and sometimes winning, and they have been beaten by a few women in
No, forgive me for interrupting. I actually said punch harder because the Italian contestant said she had never been hit so hard in her life.
So actually, my heart really goes out to her. But I actually saw 30 minutes ago some news outlets that have brought what she said, the contestant, the Italian contestant, and she had actually said that she's not angry at her. She had been furious because her dreams to the Olympics had been went up in smoke. And this is why she was angry, but she would actually very felt comfortable, to compete against her. And I think that it's really a politically contested issue, which can be taken up by advocates of extreme positions.
Okay, I want to come to that, actually, because do you think that we are seeing more of these cases because it has become a hot-button issue, or do gender disputes have something of a history in this sport? And I'm thinking, the last time was Caster Semenya, for instance, but Caster seemed like an isolated incident, whereas, I don't know, is it happening? Are we seeing it more frequently now?
So I don't think we're seeing it more frequently. As you said, the women with sex variations have always existed, and people with sex variation have always existed. And in sport, these issues came up every few years in different kinds of sport. You mentioned Caster Semenya, but also Dutee Chand. And in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there were more athletes that were kind of excluded, taking out after some sort of feature kind of triggered an investigation,
right,
a gender verification test. And so we have these sex verification tests since the 1960s. And what triggers them, that's a big question mark. When we say that women is a protected category, then we should also kind of pay attention to the fact that it protects a certain kind of femininity and a certain kind of women, and not all women and not all femininities. So these can be triggered either by, historically, by political associations, race, and all that. And definitely for women who really, really, succeed. And so what we're seeing in the last, I think, decade, since the Caster Semenya and trans athletes issue, is that there's a lot of misinformation, right, and use of examples to make a point which not necessarily related to that case. Okay,
that's an interesting topic, which I'm sure we'll come back to, and I thank you for guiding us through it so clearly. Professor Imane Khelif from Haifa University, thank you so much.
Thank you.